So, good morning, good evening, good day for everyone. Welcome to the European MedDRA User Group webinar. Today is the 19th of Jan, 2023. I'm Martin Menke. I will chair the meeting with the support of Hannah Eaton and Brian O'Hare from the MSSO, who will provide the technical support. So some general things to clarify first, which are frequently asked questions. So you can and you're absolutely encouraged to provide your questions during the presentation into the questions pane here. That is that little box you may have to extend functionally from the GoToWebinar application, and you can just type in your question in the question box, and you need to push the send button so that we can see it. We have time for the questions after each topic we are talking about, but also at the end in a larger Q&A session. Though in the end, we may not be able to answer all questions that you submit, so please bear that in mind. So, next slide. So another frequently asked question is, can you get a copy of the slides? Yes. And will this webinar be recorded? Yes, it will be. You will find the documentation in a couple of days, so don't expect them to pop up tomorrow or even today. It will take 2 or 3 days at least, and you will find them under the address of the MedDRA.org, and there's a section called User Groups. So that's where you will find it. Who are actually your hosts today? Today, it's the European Industry MedDRA User Group Steering Committee who hosts this, and this is a series of pictures of the people who are actually long-time MedDRA users and very experienced users from the European industry using MedDRA. So, and with that, actually, before we really start into the agenda, we have questions for you, and that is more or less on who you are. So where you are from and what your role is. So Hannah, can you open the
poll? Is open for people to begin voting. We'll leave it open for just a few seconds. Okay, I'm seeing just about 70% of you have voted, so I will close the poll.
Great, and I can also see the results. So 2/3 are from Europe, well, which is kind of expected because of the time zone this meeting occurs, but we've also 28% from North America, 4% from Africa, and 2% from Asia or Oceania. So people who stayed up late or got up very early during their night. So thank you for joining us. And with that, can you open the next, please?
All right, the next poll has been launched.
So that will be on the organization you work for, the type of organization.
All right, I see just over 65% have voted, so I will close the poll.
Great. So we have about 56% from the pharmaceutical industry. We have nearly a quarter from CROs or PV service providers, and we have some regulators and some device people, and 11% are others. Please let us know who others are in the future, so that we can reach out to you and potentially check for your needs for respective presentations. So the next one, please. So what is actually your role, your personal role, your position as a participant? Are you in drug safety, pharmacovigilance? Are you in a CRO doing clinical research? Are you coding? Are you primarily thing you're doing statistics or programming or other?
All right, I see 70% has voted, so I will close the poll.
Good, so a little bit more than half of you are drug safety or pharmacovigilance. About a quarter is coding. Then 16% are statistics and programming, 4% clinical research or operation, and 1% other. And again, if you're other, please let us know who you are. So that said, we have an agenda, and that is Jay Knight from the MSSO, who will talk about the MedDRA versioning options in general. Then you will have me actually talking about what we do at CSL Behring Innovation concerning MedDRA upversioning, and you will be able to compare that to what Bayer is actually doing at MedDRA upversioning, and that will be Drago presenting. And after that, we'll have a Q&A session and open house where you can ask any questions to any one of the presenters or to the MSSO. With that said, we can go into the presentations. Jane?
Yes, thank you, Martin. There we are.
All is yours.
Thank you very much. So hopefully you can see my slides. So there we are. So welcome everyone to this session. Here I am. I'll give you a wave. Hello, my name's Jane Knight and I'm a clinical associate at the MedDRA MSSO. And the purpose of today's session is I'm going to outline for you some of the options that you have with regard to version upgrades and the resources that the MSSO provides for you to assist you in this. The slides are available. Martin mentioned that they're going to be posted on the website shortly after this session, but if you're keen to have them, if you have a look in the control panel under the heading handouts, you'll see that the presentations from today are listed there, and you can just drag them or open them and download them direct from there in PDF format. So if you do want to follow along with the slides, feel free to do so with that way. So with that, I'll give you a final wave and then I'm going to switch off my camera because I know it can be distracting for you. So as a background here, just to remind you, I think it is a reminder for all of us, why are we talking about versioning? Why is it so important? Well, because MedDRA is released twice a year on the 1st of March and the 1st of September, there will be changes in the new version that may affect the MedDRA content placement or SMQs, and in turn this will affect your coded data as well as some of your search strategies or the SMQs that you use or your own internal MedDRA searches. And as we see here, new version is released, we know, twice a year, and it can include several different types of changes. On the left-hand side, we see here the 4 bubbles are types of changes that affect the hierarchy of MedDRA. So this is the terminology itself. And these will mainly impact your coding, but also you need to be aware of these, particularly new terms added, if you're building MedDRA queries. And that's something that I know our later presenters today, Martin and Drago, are going to build on. On the right-hand side here, we see that the changes can be made also to SMQs. And I think these changes sometimes get forgotten about, that it's not just the hierarchy in MedDRA that does undergo changes. The SMQs also undergo changes. But if you use the latest version of the SMQs, these then don't need the effort to upversion your own data like your coded data needs. So we've got on the left-hand side, we've got new terms, placement changes, hierarchy changes, changes to the currency of terms, LLTs being made non-current, and potentially preferred terms which get reassigned a different primary SOC. So summary for you. So now we see this slide outline some of the decisions. So you see that you need to make some of these decisions when you design your upversioning strategy. So firstly, I'll start with the blue arrow, top left. You need to decide what data it is that you plan to upversion. What's the source of this data? Is it just your drug safety data? Is it a clinical trial that you have, several clinical trials? Where are the data coming from? Secondly, we'll go down the frequency of upversioning, and why I've included this one is you need to remember to consider how often you upgrade. There may be local regulatory requirements here, or it may be just your choice based on what resources you have available and the situation within your own organization. And this is something I'm going to talk about later. You might decide to update your data with each new release, annually, or even less frequently. So this is something that we're going to come back to later. The third decision relates to tools. There you see at the bottom of the screen the purple arrow. That one there is around what tools do you have? Do you have in-house tools, commercial tools, or do you use the MSSO options that we provide, tools to help you see the changes and see where these impact your own data? Coming round, we've got resources, being aware of what staff you have, what systems as well, but IT staff as well as the coding team. And also remember they're the pharmacovigilance staff who do the research, who do the searches. You need to consider them as well because they will be upversioning your in-house queries that we're going to talk about later. And finally, you'll need to decide the extent of the updates. And what I mean here is around the changes to MedDRA, which changes to MedDRA do you choose to update? And that again is something that I'm going to come back to later. So here again, some of the considerations as part of your decision making. Do you have a drug safety database? Do you have ongoing clinical trials or previous clinical trials? Are there even data from other sources? And don't forget, what are the local reporting requirements? So I think all the options I'm going to mention today for versioning and recommended practices around versioning are summarized in the MedDRA Best Practices document, and you'll find this on the MSSO MedDRA website under the tab Support Documentation. So if you go under Support Documentation, the document doesn't get updated with each new release of MedDRA, so it'll be under the top banner. If you have a look there, do the drop down, you'll see it. And if you have difficulty finding it, just email and we can help you. So here, starting now with drug safety or single case reporting for ICSRs, the best practice guide recommends that all reporting should be done using the most recently released version of MedDRA. That's the key point there. Recommendation is that if you're reporting ICSRs to an authority, they should be done using the most recently released version. The decision, however, to recode historical data is left to the discretion of each individual organization. So long as you're sending in new cases, ideally with the most recently released version, the back stored data is up to you. So now we've got a slide about switchover, because this is another important point I wanted to make. So we know that MedDRA comes out on the 1st of March and the 1st of September. But here we see that there is an allowance of roughly 2 months. And on the first Monday of May and the first Monday of November, the new version becomes the official reporting version. So this gives you 2 months in order to do your upversioning, your back background, behind the scenes updates to your data. Here we see the document also addresses the question of clinical trials and when clinical trials data should be updated. And this recognizes that clinical trials can run for extended periods of time. We see that here, often spanning several version releases. And so companies may decide not to implement the changes at the time of each release. So clinical trials is not quite so cut and dried in the recommendation. Let's just explain why here. We've got a scenario. This illustrates what's probably quite a common scenario where there are multiple studies of varying sizes starting and closing throughout the development of the drug. Here in this example, we see that there's been 8 semi-annual releases to MedDRA. So if you have a look, I've numbered the studies 1 to 5, going there across the timeline. And at the end, we see in the middle of our fictional study number 5, we see that there's a need for an integrated safety summary. And this is the key thing, because here you're doing a meta-analysis and you want your data to all be consistent. So this is why clinical trials is not quite so clear. And the document actually provides us several options. Here we've got 6 options for how you might decide to do this within your organization. So I won't spend time going through all of these in the interest of time, but you can read it within the document. And they basically give you options around freezing the version you use, either at the start of the clinical trial or at the start of the project for all trials within that drug program, and updating somewhere along the line, either updating at the end before you do your meta-analysis, updating each 6 months, or updating at the end of each study. So there are different combinations and permutations of when you upgrade your data. So why I'm not going to go through all of those is that there is a recommendation within the document, and the recommendation identifies option 5 and option 6 as being the optimal. And I'll just emphasize that there, option 5 and option 6. And I'm going to show you these, what it looks like back on our fictional scenario. So option 5 would be to freeze at the beginning of each trial within the project and optionally recode the data with the latest version at the conclusion of the trial based on criteria defined within the project plan. So you would look at the dates of the trial, when it closes, the date of the update MedDRA, and make that choice yourself. So here we would be, sticking, when I say freeze, I mean sticking with the same version of MedDRA for coding throughout the trial, and then optionally recoding at the conclusion of the trial. However, look at the last sentence, always output the data utilizing the most recent version of MedDRA. So this is the key thing to give us consistency in our meta-analysis safety summary. So you recode somewhere along the line before you output the data. Option 6 is to recode the trial data for all trials in the project on an ongoing basis with the most recent version of MedDRA. So this approach, if you choose this option, it means every 6 months you need a process for updating your data within each study every 6 months. Now this of course is going to be the optimal, because this gives you consistency, but it also means that when you code, you're always coding using the most recent version of MedDRA. If we'd done the option 5, where we stuck with the same version of MedDRA throughout the study, and then we updated at some point in the future, we would be coding on an ongoing basis using an older version of MedDRA. So the benefit of option 6 is that it gives you always coding using the most recent version of MedDRA, and then you output using that latest version. So it may look like it's more work, but if you have a system set up to do this, it can become normal practice. Okay, so if we've done that, brings us on to the question now of methodology. You might be thinking, well, how do I do these updates that you've mentioned? Excuse me. And when evaluating the options here, you need to consider some of the elements within your organization relevant to your situation. So staffing, what staffing do you have? Are they available at the time that the update is planned to take place? Do they have the relevant skills? What IT system do you have? And I mentioned this before with tools. Do you have a commercial system? Do you use the MSSO tools? And what's your IT system internally for doing the implementation of the new tables to MedDRA and checking for changes? What's the timing? How does the timing fit with your planned study closures and milestones? What purpose are you going to be using the data? When are the outputs planned? When are there going to be safety summaries needed? What internal processes do you have? And are there any other considerations? So these are the kind of things you want to consider. And I know our later presenters are going to explain some of these in relation to their own organizations. So staying on methodology now, the best practices document has this table that I've taken here, and this describes the steps that you can take in updating your data. And this is what I mentioned earlier when I talked about options around the extent of the updates. There are 4 approaches listed here. I'm going to go through these one by one. And on the right, you see the right-hand columns there. We see that as the method becomes more complex and so resource intensive, it also becomes more accurate. So you're putting more effort in, but you're getting much more accurate data as a result for when you do your outputs. So having pointed you to that table, I'll show you each step individually. So example now of method 1. This is the most simple way of doing sum up versioning, and this is just to begin using the new version for coding new data. So no change now to any historical data. This perhaps is more appropriate within your drug safety databases where you're submitting ICSRs, less perhaps with clinical trials, but it is the most basic form that you get a new term in. Here we see an example of urinary infection confirmed as Klebsiella, and it can be coded to the new PT or LLT PT that's been added, Klebsiella urinary tract infection. You see there on the slide, I've got a snapshot from the MedDRA browser. This is from the web-based browser, and it's in the supplemental view. And so what I'm showing you there is a term that's been approved. It's called a supplemental term. It's been approved for inclusion in the next release of MedDRA, but here it's shown in the browser with a dotted line, green dotted line. This indicates that it's not yet part of the current release of MedDRA. It's still waiting in the wings, ready for release. So method 2 here is slightly more involved. This would be recoding your existing verbatims that have been linked to non-current LLTs. So this is something that a lot of companies do as the minimum when they say they've done their upgrade, because you don't want to be storing data that are coded to non-current LLTs. Here we see one. I've got 2 things on the screen there. The left-hand side is a piece from the version report. This is distributed in the folder with the release of MedDRA that you download from our website. And we see there that infusion-related hypotension has been made non-current. And you can see that in the excerpt from the browser on the right-hand side. It's got a red box around the LLT indicating that it's been made non-current. So if we have any verbatims linked there, I've given you some examples. Perhaps blood pressure always falls during infusion, hypotensive due to infusion, or infusion-related hypotension. These would need to be picked out and coded to a current LLT. Now, this usually can be done programmatically by identifying the non-current terms and then highlighting the LLT, the verbatims that have been linked to those LLTs. The third method, remember now we're going down the table, so it's becoming more resource intensive, but more accurate overall in your database. The third approach is to recode existing verbatims that are direct or lexical matches. And here I'm showing you some of the new LLTs that have been approved for inclusion under the PT of COVID-19. So here again, a couple of potential verbatim terms: asymptomatic COVID-19, an exact match to what we see there, and COVID-19 symptomatic, what we call a lexical variant. And by that, I mean the word order change. So that's method 3. These would be recoded. And again, you could probably have algorithms programmatically to identify those. Then the fourth method, where you're starting to need more manual intervention now, is to identify and recode existing verbatims to the new LLTs, where the new LLT represents a more accurate concept. Here's one I flagged up. Adenomyoepithelioma of breast is a new term in the upcoming version of MedDRA. So if you had a report, it may have previously been coded to breast neoplasm because we couldn't know at that stage, you couldn't know whether there was a better term for it. It could be benign or malignant. It's an unspecified malignancy, as we see there from the placement. So that would need to be picked out from your database and recoded. Then I've got another example of this method 4 with a different situation. You would also be looking to identify and recode existing verbatims that are more accurate. So here I've got an example of another term, diabetic myonecrosis. So this in a way is a combination term, isn't it? It's telling us that it's a complication of diabetes and a specific complication, a muscle infarction. So we would have, if there had been a report of muscle infarction due to diabetes, previously that would have had to be split coded, but now there's a single combination term, which obviously is more accurate. It's going to assist your searches when you do your signal detection or your searches. And you can see there with the placement of that PT, by having it as a combination term, you've got 3 system organ classes assigned. The primary is musculoskeletal, but then you've also got the endocrine and metabolism that capture the diabetic complications. So you see it's much more accurate to code to that. But that method 4 does require more manual intervention to search and identify. So I've shown you the options. Now you'll be thinking, well, that's all very well, Jane. You've shown me it looks like a lot of work. How much work is this going to be if I need to do these, if I decide to do as you've explained? Well, some of these steps are automated and you can do them programmatically. If you work with your IT department, you may have that built into your system already, or it's something that you can develop. And these would be, for example, applying the hierarchy changes, identifying existing links to non-current terms, identifying verbatims that are direct matches. That can usually be done programmatically as well. And you may apply algorithms. You may have algorithms already built in as part of an auto-encoding process. So similarly, you'd use algorithms to identify either switches in the word order or other similar ways of rejigging the term to find a good match in the new version. So these are the things that I think could be done programmatically. But then you've got your manual approaches, and this is what I keep emphasizing gives us accuracy. This would be where you, I think I've got a bit, I'm going to go to my next slide because this will, I think I've got a bit of an error on that one. So how much work would be involved? So we've got let me show you the programmatic ones I've just shown you. So now it's the new terms and the currency status changes, which are the ones which need to be manually identified. Remember our method 4. So a currency status, you'd have to manually update them. You could programmatically identify them, that they've been linked to a non-current term. But then your new terms, where you're looking at for a more accurate match, would need to be identified, the verbatims, manually. And on the right-hand side there, I just want to point out that all those SMQ changes, you don't have to worry about those. If you match the version that you've used for coding with the version of the SMQs that you use, you don't need to be doing manual updates there. You use the new SMQ and then that would contain all the changes. But if you've got manual, you've built your own queries, that's something that our presenters are going to talk about later. So if you've got your own queries, then you do need to be aware of the new PTs that may be relevant to your search. So having said all that, just one final point I do want to emphasize is that The updates are only needed for coding for the MedDRA terms that you've used. So you might run a report and see that there are several hundred new PTs in MedDRA, but you don't need to implement all those PTs manually if you haven't selected anything that would more accurately match to those or that are identical matches. So remember, we're only updating our data, so don't be put off by the amount of changes you see listed in the new version. So just they're coming to the end of my session, I'm just going to wrap up by reminding you that the MSSO does supply a number of resources that you can use in doing your version updates. So this would be the supplemental view of the web-based browser. And if you're not familiar with that, I'm happy to show you at the end of the session today if we have time. The MedDRA version report, I had an excerpt of that with one of my slides. This is available in the release folder for the new version of MedDRA. There's a What's New webinar that's provided with each new release every 6 months at different time zones and in different languages. There's also What's New documentation that you can read to list the changes in the new version. There's the list of supplemental terms also with the rationale as part of that. And then the final one I think is possibly the most useful to you is a MedDRA version analysis tool. This is where you can run a report from the tool on our website free of charge using your MedDRA password, and it compares any two versions of MedDRA. They don't have to be consecutive versions, and it will list all the different changes between the two versions. You can also upload your own clinical trial data or subset of your safety database. A large chunk of data can be uploaded to see the impact of the changes on your own data. And that is worth doing because, as I mentioned, it can look like there are a lot of changes in the new version, but when in fact only very few of these impact your data. So these are the resources, and if you have any questions about MedDRA upversioning or you need support in using the resources or finding them, feel free to email us at the help desk and I'll look out for your question, and me and my colleagues will be able to assist you with your questions. So that was everything. Thank you very much. Any questions do we have on that at this stage? Brian, did you see any questions about versioning? It might be too soon for people.
Yeah, I think not yet, Jane. We don't have any questions at this time, but I'll be on the lookout. Maybe we'll just give it just a couple of more seconds. And then certainly we can entertain questions at the open Q&A session at the end of this, at the end of the presentations.
Yes, certainly. If anyone wants the demonstration of anything, if there's time at the end, I'm happy to demonstrate any of the documents or the tools on the website. No? Okay, so I'll say bye-bye for now and join you for the questions.
So next one is me. So this is Martin. I need to present my screen again. It's now on upversioning at CSL Behring. And I'm Martin, as I said earlier. My background is that of a microbiologist by study. Then I have been working 10 years in cancer research, and for roughly 25 years now I'm in pharmacovigilance. And since then I've also always been kind of working with MedDRA, and for a couple of years now I'm chairing also the European MedDRA User Group Steering Committee. So that said, we can also switch to the presentation I have for you. This comes up now. What actually do I have to present? First thing is naturally a disclaimer. This is all my personal views. There's no personal or no official position of a company or a regulator, and there is no warranty of any kind coming with the information provided. Nevertheless, I will tell you a little bit about the setting, so what CSL is and kind of what the size of the company and so far is, what MedDRA term groupings are in general, and then actually how the upversioning is done at CSL, and a short summary, and again, then we'll have a little bit time for questions and answers. So what is CSL? CSL is the fifth largest global biotech company. That sounds as we are a very big company, but our turnaround is about 10, or the revenue is about 10 billion US dollars. So we are more a medium-sized, potentially large medium-sized company, but primarily really in the biotech area. So we have special products and special cases. So this may not be completely transferable to what I show you, transferable to other companies of the same size concerning the income or the people working with you. So we're in biologicals, products produced from human plasma, recombinants, we have gene therapy, and so forth. If you're interested into more details and where I got this information from, there's a link, and that's all official information on the company. What does that mean concerning MedDRA? MedDRA coding and reversioning, and what technology do we have, respectively? So currently CSL bearing, and that's the protein part of the CSL group, processes about 40,000 cases, case reports per year, and that includes the follow-up. We have a pharmacovigilance database. We update that twice yearly, as most of you will do with the pharmacovigilance database. It's the weekend before the first Monday in May or November that we practically do it in the production database setting. And we have also clinical databases, and we actually also update our clinical project twice yearly. So we are in the section 5.6 area of clinical database reversioning, as Jane provided. And this actually happens a little bit to a little bit different time frame. That's actually done 1 to 2 weeks before the cutover date for practical reasons. So the case data upversioning in our pharmacovigilance database and our clinical databases is done automatically, and we recode it algorithmically. So actually, what the reversioning is doing on the coded terms is it checks whether the LLT is current, and if it's current, then it just gets the new version. But if it's become non-current, it's replaced with a new MedDRA term based on the PT allocation it has. So 100% algorithmic, no manual intervention. That's how we deal with the existing data. Going to the MedDRA term groupings, the MTGs, you will see that acronym 100 times coming up now. So the first thing is kind of, well, what are MedDRA term groupings? And a little disclaimer concerning the role of the MSSO. Well, a MedDRA term grouping is a custom collection of MedDRA terms for a certain purpose, for your needs. So it is actually your custom grouping and collection of MedDRA terms. And with that, the MSSO will not provide any services except providing all the documents on how to generally do it, but it's all on yourself to do it. So what may be actually the purpose of this? So what's the use for these groupings? So and this list is not complete potentially, but there's a big use in risk management, for example. You can have groups that highlight certain adverse events or other MedDRA encoded data elements. So the ACEs, as they call it, it can provide you with a functionality to alert certain people when events of special interest pop up. And also, they can be used in quality management, so they can connect MedDRA encoded data with other data elements, to provide error messages to case processors. For example, if you can use the IME, the EMA's important medical events list, actually to force the case processor to assess such cases that have events that are on this list to be assessed as serious. That's kind of a very typical setting many companies use. And also you can use it as part of your reporting rules. So it may trigger reports, kind of E2Bs or SIMEs or whatever is required in the area you want to report to, including partners, for example, based on MedDRA encoded data. So if you have a provisional license to sell things and you need to report certain things expeditedly to the agency where you have you licensed that product, or for any other reasons, you may want to include a MedDRA term group into your reporting rules. And also quite frequently used is to use it to support data entry in listedness assessment, sometimes also called auto-listedness. So that is also a group, MedDRA term grouping. So that is on the use of the usefulness of MedDRA term groupings. These groupings are only useful if you document and create them well. So you definitely need a good documentation around it. One of the key things is the purpose. You need to define the purpose. You clearly have to have a documentation of what medical concept, what idea is behind it. So what medical condition do you want to capture? Because that's the medical reasoning for picking terms. And then more a little bit MedDRA technically wise, you need a MedDRA search description. So how did you search MedDRA for terms that match your medical concept? And then definitely a rationale for including terms or excluding terms. So the inclusion criteria and the exclusion criteria. And this is actually an exercise that you're supported with MSSO documentation. So there is a data retrieval and presentation points to consider document that describes how you built such algorithms, how you use MedDRA in this respect. And you can have a look at the SMQ documentation. An SMQ per se is a MedDRA term grouping. It's an official one, maintained by the MSSO, but have a look of how those are documented, because that's definitely done very well. And there's also some training provided by the MSSO. You see the snip from the educational roadmap from the MSSO here. So the things with the yellow arrow, that's kind of the trainings that are provided. And back to CSL, kind of how do we go about with the MedDRA term groupings? The groupings itself, so the MedDRA terms are technically held in our database as something that is called event groups. So they're just lists of the MedDRA terms. This grouping allows PTs and higher level terms, so HLT, HLGT, SOCs even, or SMQs. So that's held in our pharmacovigilance database. And the concept description, what I just talked about, so the purpose and how it's built, that is kept in a spreadsheet. So more manually. So how do we do about up-versioning of these groups? Practically for all these groups, there is a two-step approach. I think that potentially already got out of Jane's presentation already, because you, on one side, you have an impact to your included terms. So you have impact on existing data. And then, and you need to check that. For that, actually, the tool would be the data impact analysis via the MVAT tool. And if it's on SMQs, you may want to look on the version reports, and we also always draw our own version report with the MVAT tool with using the secondary links option as well. So that also those are in the version report included. And that is the most important part really, or the most critical part, so that your groups become or stay current, so that new terms which then come with the new version and are used for coding actually, that match to your concept, what you're looking for, actually also with the new version, they become available for coding, so they will be used. So if you don't have them included into your MedDRA term groupings, they will be lost and you will miss them. So if you use something signal detection, you miss out on a signal because of these MedDRA versioning technicalities if you don't look at the new terms. So for that, you do need your concept descriptions, you do need a MedDRA report, the version report with secondary links, or you can do that in the supplemental terms together with a concept description. And here's just a little picture. You have seen something similar already from Jane. So why do you need to check? Well, I already gave one example, but you need to really check, for example, the auto-listedness, because downgraded terms may not be considered listed anymore based on the new PT it got. So an example is some time ago, the local X reactions kind of were downgraded to LLTs. So local swelling became an LLT only, and became subordinate to PT of swelling. And if you in your reference safety information, you explicitly have provided the terminology local swelling, and your system works on PT, then you suddenly will have all the swellings popping up as listed in your auto-listedness, which is incorrect because that general swelling may be more severe, so dependent on the regulatory area you're working in. So that's one thing. The risk management, the numbers in reports may shift, that may potentially mimic a signal, and for the future you may miss signals, as I said already. And actually for quality management and reporting rules, they simply may fail because they miss certain things that have been added as new terms, but principle match your medical idea and the requirement that has been that you may have committed to. So that said, what I wanted to show you is give you a little demo of the MVAT tool, and this takes a little time. So, but here is the MedDRA site. This is under tools. You'll find it, and you'll find the MVAT here. And you can also have the link here, open MVAT. So you just can, and you open it with your usual ID and password, and here it is. So this is how it looks. As Jane said, you can compare any version, so not only the last, but for the example I have here, I will just use 25.0 and 25.1, and you can actually do a data impact report. This is what I'm going to show you, but you can actually also run the version report, and that's between any version. So if you do a data impact report, for example, you want to check what has changed between the 25.0 and 25.1 in the system organ class of infections. That will be the example I give you, because you use that for signal detection or something like that. You can just click here. It will ask you to upload the data, and you can really update huge lists. Our auto-listedness is more than 10,000 terms, and that works in one go. And the capacity is even higher. And here the data has to be in a specific format, and good for you to know potentially this is the minimal. Whatever you have in your Excel spreadsheet, write to it is ignored by the tool. So you can just have the information and have all the context in remaining in your Excel spreadsheet on the right of these three columns. So this is, you just need to do it, and then you just need to do next. And it does a data validation, and this is something I provoked on purpose. Actually, I've added another row just for this demonstration into this with a nonsense or a test term. So it does recognize actually whether it's a true MedDRA term and code within that version that you have claimed it to be. And then you can just run the report. And it's going a little bit quicker if you don't use it in a demonstration in parallel. But it usually takes 10 to 30 seconds, even if your list is about 10,000 terms. So, and even being in a presentation, it was under 1 minute, and it tells you actually, go here, so the whole system organ class actually showed only one demotion, and you can actually just click on it and it shows you, so this PT had been demoted to LLT under this new PT. So you will know that, and you can tell the people that are doing or using that MedDRA term grouping that there is actually not really a basic impact to be expected concerning counts or something like that. And last but not least, you definitely can export things within kind of a snap, just on a spreadsheet. So very easy, and that is then something you can communicate to whomever you need to communicate the information to. So this is the demo. So concerning our time flow, when are we starting our upversioning our MedDRA term groupings? Actually, you can start, and I'm personally not fixed on when I have to start. I'm only fixed on when do I have to be ready, because I need to provide the data to the technical team who implements it then in the database, kind of end of September and end of March, and I need to be ready. But you can start with the supplemental terms about 2 months before, for example, and that's when I start my process usually, and I identify the changes based using the supplemental terms, and with a release, I check the impact on the included PTs via MVAT, and impact on SMQs via the version report, because the SMQ changes is something you cannot see in the supplemental terms view. You need to wait until the version report is published, and then I compile all these changes and the impact analysis, and then they're discussed with the medical reviewer people. There's allocated experts based on their function, so be it the product medical responsible people or people in case management with medical background that will kind of double check. And on day 30, so 30 days after release, I hand over to the database team for implementation. And then at the weekend before cut over, this is implemented in our production database. And around this weekend, actually, there is another thing that we do is we do a case event count impact report for risk management, to really allow people to see the data and the impact it will have on what they are looking for. So if they have certain risks that are defined, and they've seen 20 cases of this and that for earlier PSCR, and they compare it with the previous interval, or even changes in the aggregate data, the cumulative data, and they see changes there, so that they exactly know that this and that change is not really a signal, but is related to MedDRA technical changes. So that is kind of the time flow. What do you not need to upversion because it's something provided? The IME list from EMA is naturally provided by EMA, so they do the respective upversioning, but you should check whether that is really all correct technically in MedDRA. Because they do list the changes, but that is not always consistent, which what you may find. So we use that as QC to support case assessment concerning seriousness, and technically we actually simply remove the old listing and upload the new list. So that really makes it quite simple. There's another list we use, that's the unqualified test name term list. That's provided by the MSSO and naturally then also reversioned by the MSSO. We use it as a blacklist for AE coding, so we do not allow terms to be chosen for AE codes that are actually just tests. And we use it as a positive list, as a white list in the lab test section for coding the test itself. So that's what you're using. A short summary. So what technology, which media do we use? We document the event group lists, the medical concept on spreadsheet. We use the MVET tool. We use supplemental tools, actually, so tools provided by the MSSO. We have our medical concept description. As I said, we have used the supplemental terms and the version report. For complex changes, you need to do an individual check. They are also listed in the version report, but they're usually not very many, and there it's not really critical that you have to do that manually. Last but not least, we do have via our database analysis tool this case event count impact report for risk management. That is what we are using. So that said, thank you, and questions?
Okay, we have 3 questions, actually 4 now. So the second question is specifically addressed to Jane. This first question, Martin, I'll address to you, but Jane, you may want to comment as well. So I need to paraphrase a little bit here. The question is, can you provide guidance regarding grouping of similar medical concepts like platelet count decrease, which is in the investigation SOC, and thrombocytopenia, which is in the blood SOC? Both have different SOCs, often reported in the same subjects by the principal investigators involved in some trials, and lead to errors in signal detection or safety analysis. So what is the best approach to apply with respect to MedDRA term groupings or SMQs?
So let me start that one from an MSSO perspective, and then if Martin's got anything to add from a company perspective, we can take it that way. So what you described there is the perfect need for an SMQ. The fact that there are investigation terms within the investigation system organ class and then conditions within other body system SOCs. So here you're talking about hematopoietic thrombocytopenia, which is one that we use in our training actually. So it's a good example that we use a lot. And this one, it's a hierarchical SMQ, and there's an individual, there's a level 2, so a sub SMQ, which actually relates to thrombocytopenia. So what you described there is wanting to group the signs and symptoms together with the abnormal lab results and the names of the conditions for your search is the purpose of an SMQ. If there isn't an SMQ for a particular condition that you're looking for, that's when you build your in-house ad hoc query, I would call that, and that's what Martin's been telling us about his MedDRA term groupings. So it doesn't matter that your investigators then report differently because at your analysis stage you're able to group the events.
Yes, and a good example actually, thrombocytopenia, because actually the SMQ is based on the erythropoietic, so the cellular background. So it does not contain the autoimmune kind of cause as a list of these terms. So if you're just looking for the fact that you don't have enough thrombocytes, then you may actually, the SMQ may not work for you. So before you use an SMQ, read the definition and check the terms and check whether it really matches with what you need. Because here you may need to include other terms like autoimmune thrombocytopenia, because that's not in the SMQ. So yes, good example, and you already have the caveat. You need to check.
Thank you, Martin.
Okay, let me read out the second question here. This is specifically addressed to Jane. Is it possible to take the upversioning decision based on the percentage of impacted data in a trial? For example, if the change is impacting less than 1 to 2% of the coded data for the medium volume trial, then pass it. And if it's more than that, proceed ahead with the upversioning.
Wow, that's an interesting proposal there. So really from an MSSO perspective, I can't advise you on how you would make that decision on whether you upgrade or don't upgrade. I highlighted the options that are available to you, and it says that this would be based on your project requirements. The only thing I would say there is you doing it on a numeric like 1 to 2% is, I would say, is not the best approach for making a decision, because unless you look at those terms, you might find that the 1 to 2% actually involves some really critical updates. It might be new conditions or new lab tests, which are really core to your clinical trial. So it would depend, or it might be that it's a higher percentage, but actually the terms were more specialized or more peripheral, that they don't actually impact. So if you're looking at how much of your data are impacted, it's even if you say to me, well, it's 2% impacted, I would still say, well, that 2% could be something that really does matter, really critical to your study, compared to some which are not so critical. So I can't really advise on how you make that decision. Just that there are the options for you.
Yes, and one question back from me would be, how do you determine that after the second or third reversioning you kind of skipped? Because you cannot reversion or upversion your data just going from 23 to 25. You then need to go 23.1, 24, 24.1, 20. You need to then actually catch up and do multiple upversionings in a go, because else you get into trouble. IT technical wise, and also concept wise, signal detection wise, and so forth.
Yeah, it's all about consistency, isn't it? At the end of the day, you want your data to be as consistent as possible, especially when you're merging multiple studies. So yeah, thank you, Martin, for your input on that one.
Okay, so the third question here is from Martin. This question is about CSL strategy for auto-listedness. Is it done merely on EMA's IME list?
We use IME not for listedness. We use that as a QC to check seriousness assessments. So to avoid that terms that are on the IME list to go out and be assessed as non-serious. That's what we use the IME list for. The auto-listedness actually is based on the reference safety information, and we go through the reference safety information, identify the events and the terms that are explicitly listed there. Then we really check whether they're always under no condition can be considered listed. We have an SOP and how this is to be done. And this is also applied when checking the auto-listedness list of terms there. And then actually what the function in the database is just that it pre-populates the listedness assessment based on whether that term is on this list with yes or with no, and then it still remains to the discretion of the case processor to really confirm or overwrite it because of greater severity or something that is not typically fatal and not explicitly listed as fatal, that this then is made unlisted. I hope that answers the question.
Okay. And the last question is a technical question about MVAT. I'll provide an answer, and Jane and Martin, if you have anything to add to that. It's a straightforward question about when MVAT is updated with a new version of MedDRA. So that would be the same as the release dates for MedDRA. So that's going to be the 1st of March and the 1st of September for English, and the 15th of March and the 15th of September for all the currently supported languages. So that's all we have for questions.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Brian.
Good. So if there are no more questions, I can introduce Drago. The next talk, he will talk about how Bayer is doing it. Bayer is a company is slightly larger than CSL and has a completely different set of technology, which you will see soon. But Drago himself is a medical doctor. He's from the University of Nis, Serbia. He has worked for the Medicines and Medical Device Agency of Serbia in PV case processing and evaluation of BBREs and RMPs from 2012 till 2018. And since 2018, he is with Bayer as a medical dictionary expert. In his role, he performs the medical review of code assignments to ensure medically accurate and consistent coding output and MedDRA data retrieval and analysis in the Bayer's medical coding and ontology governance team, including maintenance and upversioning of all MedDRA terms grouping at Bayer. So that's what he's going to talk about. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Martin, for the nice introduction and also for the very nice presentation about how you perform the upversioning at CSL Behring. So I'm now going to try and present also how do we perform the same versioning here at Bayer. I should turn on the camera to avoid. Okay. So let's start first with the introduction of our function. What are we doing? And then we will move to how we actually perform the upversioning at Bayer. So for timelines and resources, and then talk about the 3 aspects of the MedDRA upversioning, and we'll finish up with a short summary. So what is the medical coding and ontology governance in Bayer? So in Bayer we have a centralized medical coding, and this is our one team that is responsible for coding philosophy, coding systems, and coding process development and performance. And it is also known as the global medical coding team. We code against MedDRA and MedDRA Japanese, also against WHO drug and IDF, Japanese drug codes. So we have one set of coding conventions for all coding, whether it's a clinical trial or pharmacovigilance data. We perform during playing several steps like first autocoding algorithm, artificial intelligence. We have also human coders that are responsible for review and acceptance of these proposals, and MDs and experienced coders perform QA of the code. We perform the coding activities, different systems. We have the matchpoint coder as our medical coding system, then just Argos, PV database, SAS, and artificial intelligence, machine learning. When we talk about the MedDRA versioning at Bayer, we start with timelines resources. So we also perform the up versioning twice per year, with each new version released by the MSSO. But unlike CSL Behring, we don't use the supplemental terms. We start the up versioning on the day when the new MedDRA version is released, so on the 1st of March and 1st of September. We do it this way because we need to load the new version into our system that we use for the up versioning. We also finish the up versioning on fixed dates, the first Monday of May and first Monday of November. And since we perform this in the medical coding system, then the MedDRA dictionary and the updated MTGs are then subsequently distributed from the medical coding system and MTG manager to downstream systems like pharmacovigilance safety database or clinical trial data environments, and so on. The resources that are used for this process can be split into human resources on one hand and technical resources or applications. On the human resource side, we have 4 medical dictionary experts, 2 physicians and 2 pharmacists, 2 medical coders or more if we need them for some reasons, and 1 coding workflow manager who serves as a data steward. We also, during the up versioning, have support of our internal business partners, the Bayer MedDRA steering committee, or subject matter experts from pharmacovigilance or from other therapeutic areas or clinical trials. And we also need external providers of technical support from companies that have helped us develop our systems, like Proficient for Matchpoint Coder or TCS for MTG Manager and Capgemini for infrastructure. Speaking of our tools, we have the Matchpoint Coder, which is a homegrown medical coding system developed at Bayer in cooperation with Proficient. It has 2 satellite tools that we use for the up versioning. One is the MVUT, the MedDRA version update tool, and we also have the synonym and LLT update tool, or SALU. And for the MTG up versioning, we use the MTG Manager, which is based on the top grade edge by the top quadrant. So let's start first with the MedDRA dictionary and synonym list up versioning. Here you can see as an example how it was planned and executed for the version 25.0, so last year. The process, as explained before, started on 1st of March with the new release of the MedDRA version. So system new files are downloaded from MSSO website. We loaded them first into the development environment to be sure that there would be no surprises. And after that, we load them to productive environment. On the same day, we begin with data analysis using version report, MSSO support documentation, taking into consideration our coding conventions and our synonym list, and also the flagged term list, which contains the LLTs that are excluded from autocoding. Now they are replaced by a BMQ. BMQ stands for Biometric Query. So after 1 month, we start with the synonym list update. At this time, we take the content-related decisions for deletion of synonyms or remapping them to new or changed existing LLTs, and for implementation of these decisions in synonym and LLT update tool, SALU. important to note is that at this point, and also in other processes, we apply the 4I review principle, which means that one person acts as a proposer and the other one as an acceptor. After about 2 weeks, we start with the impact analysis, which is performed in MVUT, the MedDRA version update tool. Here we review the impact that new MedDRA dictionary and also the synonym list updates have on the data, and especially also the PV database impact. And we also apply impact adjustments. At the end, on the first Monday of May or November, we start with the implementation. And the MVUT actually helps us by automatizing the deployment of new MedDRA version into production, implementation of all the synonym changes, and initiation of full refresh of MedDRA coded data in PV safety database. Now on this slide, you see the same process, but it's shown as a workflow. And what I want to draw your attention to is the fact that I've described already, that we have the proposer and acceptor role, and the fact that we also have to perform actions in sequence. So we start with, when the new version is loaded in the system, we start with LLTs that are replacing the synonyms. Then we take the look at the retired LLTs, then LLTs which have changed PTs, and then what is the impact on the Argus database. And also on the same time, you can see the MDEs propose the synonym updates based on the new LLTs that are available. And again, everything again needs to be accepted at the end. So we always have this 4I review principle before implementing the new version. So now let's move to the MedDRA, to the MTG upversioning. Now I have to say that at Bayer we use MTG as an umbrella term for all the medical term groupings. So that include MedDRA-based MTGs and food drug-based MTGs. But since food drug-based MTGs are not in the scope of this presentation, when I say MTG, then you know that I would mean the MedDRA-based MTGs. We can basically say that we have two kinds of MTGs in use. We have MTGs that come from external sources, like the SNQs that come from the MSO, and they are simply uploaded into our system on the day of the new MedDRA version release. Then we have the IME list, which is provided by EMA, and it is uploaded, but on the day when the upversioning process is finished. It doesn't, for technical reasons. Yeah. DMA list, also provided by the EMA. We check the content. If there are any changes, we make the manual adjustments, manual update. And we also use the unqualified test name term list, but due to technical limitations, we cannot just load it into a system, but we have actually created a grouping out of it, and it undergoes the regular upversioning process. So we make the changes manually, analog to what is done by the EMA. And on the homegrown side, we have MedDRA labeling groupings, or the MLGs. They are the most narrow groupings. As the name says, we use labeling as building blocks for other groupings, and especially for the product data sheets. So then we have the biometric queries. These are created when we don't have the suitable SNQ available, or the SNQ that is available is not suitable for our needs. It's too broad or too narrow. After them, we have the product-specific BioMedDRA queries, so they are similar to the BMQs, but they take into consideration the specificities of products, like if you have a lead that is injected into eye, or contraceptive devices, or that they are a bit specific and require specific codes. Then we have the adverse events of special interest. These are groupings that, as the name say, contain the list of adverse events of special interest that are usually defined in discussions with health authorities for reporting purposes. And in the end, already mentioned, product data sheets that are used for auto-listedness. Here we have the example of planning of the MTG upversioning, and here we have the dates from the upversioning to version 25.1 from last autumn. So we started as with the process on the first day of the MSSO release, when it is uploaded into Top-Rate Edge, which is our MTG manager system, and we start the upversioning process. On the same day, the system calculates the impact of the existing MTGs, and the MTGs can start their review. On the 20th of September, we had so-called GTC meeting. GTC stands for Global Terminology Committee, and members of this committee represent different functions like medical coding, clinical development, pharmacovigilance, analytics, labeling, medical affairs, so on. And we made this GTC, this committee makes final decision on the proposed actions for the MLGs. So, because I said that we have that MLGs are contained in other groupings and also especially in PDSs, we have to first finish their upversioning. So after we agree on final actions for the MLGs, we can start with the PDS upversioning as well. On the 18th of October, we had the final GTC meetings for all the other groupings to make final decision of all the other actions, and this time we generate documentation, and we have some time until the first Monday in November to check if everything is correct, make corrections if needed, and on the first Monday in November we publish the upversioning into production, upversioned MTGs, and all the changes that are made during this process are automatically implemented at the same time. When we perform the upversioning, we take several things into account. First of all, we start with the definition. What is the purpose of this MTG and what are the areas of interest? We also take the proposals by the system into account. A system has algorithm that is based on hierarchy of included PTs, and based on this algorithm, it proposes some actions. Basically, this algorithm works by comparing where the new PT in which HLT this whole new PT is, and if we have some PTs from this same HLT already included in any of the groupings. So the system basically say, hey, you have new PT coming into this HLT, and you already have something from this HLT. What do you want to do with this? And we also have the option for so-called ad hoc changes, like that we could make suggestions, we could take proposals for any grouping and any PT. So we are not limited but by what is proposed by the system. When we make decisions, we take inclusion and exclusion criteria into considerations. Inclusion criteria tells us what are the types of PTs that we want to include, or sometimes it's what kind of hierarchical structures or to which hierarchical structures are these PTs limited? Only PTs from this HLT or this HLGT. And exclusion criteria do the opposite. So they draw the line and say, we don't want this kind of PTs, like we don't want signs and symptoms, something like that. And we also have the list of excluded PTs, to which we would PTs that we discuss. Should this be included? Should it be excluded? We are not sure. It's somewhere in between. And if we decide not to include it, we put it to this list of excluded PTs to serve as a guidance for the future, and also to avoid that in few years some new MD or some new GSLs looks at the MTG and say, hey, why didn't we include this PT before? So, like I said, system calculates the impact, and this impact is then shown as 6 sub-reports of the impact analysis report. These are the demoted PTs, brand new PTs with no suggested MTGs. So when the system doesn't know or doesn't find where the new PT, brand new PT can go, and so we have them just as a list, and we can select, make the ad hoc change, ad hoc action, and select some fitting MTG if needed. Then we have the PTs which have changed text, PTs which have changed primary HLT, and LLTs which have changed PTs. We have these sub-reports because each of them shows data a bit differently, and we have different possibilities or different actions that we can take within them. Here is the example of the impact analysis report. This is the demoted PTs report. As you can see on the left side, we see what is the demoted PT, where is it now mapped to, what is the new PT, is it already existing or is it a new PT, and what is the MTG that had this, that is impacted or that we have to decide on. And we have the actions we can choose. Do we want to add this new PT? Do we want to add it to the exclusion list? Do not add, discuss. And also add to the reason for change. Why did we decide it? And this is important because all the changes that we enter in this impact analysis report, all the actions that are proposed, they go into the so-called consolidated change report. This report contains all the actions, the reasons for change, and then we can generate the draft CCR and share it with other stakeholders and also collect feedback from them. So that's why we give some time to the people who are actually using these groupings, who are the product experts or subject medical experts, to review our changes and to give us feedback that would appear as a comment here in this area. And then we review all this during the GTC meeting and decide on final actions, what needs to be taken. Once we implement them, all the actions will be documented by the system. And as you noticed, everything stays within the system. So we don't export anything, we don't send by emails. There is very little possibility for data loss and human errors. And also just one snapshot from the documentation within the system. I already said that all the changes have been tracked automatically and documented automatically. Here we can see the actions that are taken after each new version, and say what is included, what is excluded, or something else changed, and so on. And we can always add the documentation to make additional changes if we want it. So that was about MTGs. Now the third part of the upversioning process is upversioning of clinical trial and pharmacovigilance data. here we can also split this into three parts. First is clinical, we talk about ongoing trials. Here we do the full recode of adverse events, clinical and device events, and medical history procedures on ongoing trials. We have 100 ongoing clinical trials in phases 1 to 4. We perform, like I said, full recode of these terms. And here we said over 130 MedDRA coded terms after version 25.1 release for all three of these groupings. Of these three groups, actually, it's a rough estimate because in total we have 390,000. So, but it would have taken a bit of an effort to come up with exact numbers. So we split them roughly into thirds. Then we also have the compound data. This is for the trials that are not ongoing anymore. And here we also performed full recode, and this was this has taken 170,000 recodes during the last upversioning. In the end, we have pharmacovigilance data. As I said, we also performed the full recode of all metadata, and this was about 3.5 million cases after version 25.1 release, or over 20 million records that needed to be recoded. So just to summarize, when do we do this upversioning? When do we do this recode? So for ongoing trials, we perform the recode within 24 hours for in-house managed clinical trials, because we code the in-house managed trials daily. Then for the external, for the outsourced clinical trials, we will perform this recode with the next planned data transfer from the external supplier, because we code them once per month. For the closed trials, we perform the recode by compound data pools within 2 to 3 months after the release of the new version, and into production, release into production. And this depends also on the priority of these drugs. So for high priority compounds like Xarelto or Eylea, we start first with them. And like I mentioned before, all the data delivery is going from the matchpoint coder, which is our coding system, and also the retrieval from MedDRA codes and coding queries from the matchpoint coder is all done by the complex SAS macro, but auto-coding and omission solving takes place in MVC. So this is the roadmap for the recode of pharmacovigilance data. The first 2 steps are similar to what we already mentioned in the MedDRA dictionary upversioning, so I won't repeat them again. But on the first Monday of May or November, when we actually apply these dictionary changes, then we also start the recoding, first by assigning the modifier verbatim to prevent creation of omissions, and also then start the recoding of Argus cases. In case omissions are created when, as reported, description to be coded turn code to different PTs, and omissions are important because they require manual code assignment by the manual coders. And like I mentioned before, we had to recode 3.5 million cases, and we did it in about 2 weeks for technical limitations, because we cannot, technical limitations on Argus side, they cannot set too many changes. I think 15,000 per day. And of course, of all these cases, only 10,000 omissions were, so of 20 million entries, only 10,000 were actually omissions that needed to be manually solved after the last release. And last short summary. One question is that I've also mentioned several times before. When we do the up versioning, whether it's a dictionary up versioning or is a MTG up versioning recode, we always have to take care about the quality data. That's why we always have this 4i review principle. Then we have different steps that ensure the quality, like internal NT discussions, review and feedback from the global safety lead. All the steps, all the changes made to the MTGs need to be approved by the Global Terminology Committee. All the changes to coding strategy and conventions need to be approved by the Coding Steering Committee. Mentioned before, so medical coding takes the central role in this process, with all the dictionary data coming to medical coding and from medical coding and our systems like MTG Manager and FEC. The updated data, updated dictionary go to the downstream systems like Argus Safety or SAS-based or SQL-based clinical trial data environments. One last thing about the MTG Manager that we are using, Top Rate Edge MTG Manager, it allowed us to eliminate the need for the Excel spreadsheets, sending emails, change documentation into Word and then printing out in PDFs and storing it somewhere. So everything stays within the system. We have the workflow and graphic user interface driven processes. We have automatic system generated notifications, system generated history of changes, and the documentation stays within the system. We can generate PDF, print it out, and if needed, with just one simple click. It's always up to date. Thank you very much for your attention. Now, I'm up to your questions. Or we can move to the,
Okay.
I think, the question and answer section.
Certainly. We do have a few questions for you, Drago. The first is, does the database lock date influence the upversioning decision? For example, suppose the database lock is planned on the 30th of March.
No.
So is that something?
No, it doesn't influence. So we so the process is independent of this question. So the upversioning process is always going on, and from the 1st of March or 1st of September, and lasts for 2 weeks, and we don't take into consideration what is the stage or what is the data lock point of the subjects.
Okay, thank you. Next question is, which versioning method that the MSSO explained, so that's Jane's presentation, does Bayer use when you said full recode of all adverse event terms? Between methods 1 to 4, do you also identify verbatim terms to new LLTs that are more accurate concepts? In other words, method 4.
Yes, exactly. So we check, as I said, basically it's method 4. So we always look what are the new available LLTs or terms, and for example, when you talk about the synonym remapping, we also look, do they fit, especially if for example, they were mapped to an LLT that is no longer valid, or it is this LLT is now remapped to some other PTs. We also check, should it be remapped to some other LLT, some other PT, and so on.
Okay. Next question is, how often does Bayer refresh the safety database to update any MedDRA terms or SMQs?
Twice per year, with each new MedDRA release.
Okay.
If I understood the question correctly.
Right. Next question is, when Argus is up-versioned, does the case narrative also change?
No, the case narrative doesn't change. So what is reported, this doesn't change. Only the code that is the PT or the LLT that is assigned can change. But the as reported narrative doesn't change.
Okay, that's all we have for the questions at the moment. So Martin, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yes, so because we also have some questions to you. So thank you, Drago and Jane. Very great presentations. And I think I am already sharing the next polling question because we actually want to know how you organize your MedDRA term groupings, if you have some, or not. If you don't have them, that's section F. But please let us know, how do you organize them?
Okay. So when the polling is closed, I think we need to make sure we publish the results so the attendees can see the poll results. I think we didn't do that on a few of the polling questions earlier in the presentation.
I see about 30% of our audience has voted. It seems to be staying pretty consistent, so I will close the poll and share the results. Looks like most are saying don't use.
Yeah, I can read it out as well in case people struggle with the function pane. So 5% use text documents, 27% use spreadsheets, 16% have a homegrown database for it, 14% have a database from vendor, and 39% don't use MTGs or CMQs. So that's great to know. And I would be interested in database systems. So let you know. Let me know what vendor you're using, just personally, because we're also trying to economize and looking for products that would help us here. So the next polling question would be, well, how do you up-version them, your MedDRA term groupings, CMQs? Do you do it manually with the MSSO tools, as for example, like I've shown you for CSL, or do you have a specialized tool interaction with spreadsheets or database that's more or less homegrown, like Bayer does, or do you have a tool from a vendor, or do you have something else?
Give another couple seconds for the last remaining people to vote in the poll. All right, I will close and show the results.
Great, and I again will read out what you have ticked, what I can see. So 22% is using the manual tools, 28% have a specialized tool, homegrown, 31% have something from a vendor and 19 have something else. So again, I would be very interested in the vendors who have respective tools available. So please let me know. And with that, actually, we can go on with any question that may have occurred. And actually, we also allow questions now for things that you always wanted to ask the MSSO or us. So in a general way that do not need to be linked with the presentations, but presentation questions preferred, naturally.
Okay, no questions as of yet, but we'll hang on for a short bit to see if any questions come in. Okay, here's a question. Have Bayer or CSL started looking into the FDA labeling groupings?
Oh.
Martin, you want to take first? Or?
Yes, I can start. Yes, we have looked into it, but we have our opinion. Because there's also another thing that's called FDA queries that has been released. So on kind of the CMQ area, and those are very data-driven. That was my personal impression. So before you use them, you really need to check your product and your details, because it has a different angle on looking onto things, and that may not match your products and your idea. So have a look at them, but be careful. Don't just use them without thinking.
Yeah, we at Bayer also took a look at that, and also the use of them would depend on the use of the people who would use on product experts. And since we haven't received any, we at Medical Coding haven't received much of an interest for this, many questions about them. So I'm not sure if people still don't know about them, or is it that they don't suit the need of our people, so they're content with grouping that we already have. So, but yeah, it's not a problem to make them available for anyone in the company.
Any more questions?
Yeah, no additional questions.
Well, then I can potentially, we are close to the hour anyhow, so I can wrap up and thank our speakers for the time and effort. They were really great presentations, and I would also want to make you aware of our questions, another question from us. So please let us know what you'd like to hear about in our next webinar as European MedDRA User Group Steering Committee, that we're organizing this type of webinars together with the MSSO. And also whether you think you have something to present to this audience, or even on what is the next part of the European MedDRA User Group face-to-face meeting in Berlin in April. So for this kind of feedback, you can contact me directly, personally, at my company email, or you can address this to the MSSO help email address. And again, a note is, please think about coming to Berlin on the 18th of April. It's a face-to-face meeting from 9 till 4:30 in the afternoon. It's a face-to-face meeting, and actually the MedDRA, the WHO drug user group meeting will be on the following day, same location, on the 19th of April. In details concerning agenda and how to register when things are settled on the MedDRA.org user groups or WHO UMC.org user group meetings.
And that should be in a few days, Martin. We'll be able to make an announcement about registration.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I just wanted to say. Please be patient. It's not open yet, but as Brian just said, it'll be soon. So that said, thank you very much. Are there more questions? Anything left over?
Well, just one here, and maybe this is one that you might want to respond offline here. Question is, do you have experience with questions from authorities in pharmacovigilance inspections? So that's probably a lot of detail in that response, I would assume.
Yes, I can say yes, I have. And I think that is something we may want to discuss offline, but please contact me. Yes, that said, have a great rest of the day. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for having us, really. So thank you for your time listening into this, and hope you liked it. Let us know, and have a great rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Bye.
Bye.